awakening to all pious yogis. This evening we shall discuss conditionality based on one of the discourses in the Nidana Samyutta. Sometimes the scriptures explains the origin of suffering in terms of Paticca Samuppada, or the cessation of suffering in terms of called Nirodha Vara. The origin of the suffering is explained in terms of Samudaya Vara. So during the practice of mindfulness meditation, Vipassana meditation, meditators have to realize whatever phenomenon is arising due to a condition. And we can say that cause, condition, the arising of an object or phenomenon, or that cause is also not permanent. It also subject to passing away. Since the cause is not permanent, what is arising depending on that cause will also not everlasting. So meditators have to realize the mindfulness, in other words, the consciousness is always arising depending on an object or phenomenon. So if the mindfulness is sharp and there's a deep concentration, meditators will realize a series of cause and effect. When there's a phenomenon arising, that phenomenon conditioning the arising of the awareness or the consciousness. So that process of awareness or consciousness is being conditioned by the object, and that awareness or consciousness can condition the arising of another phenomenon. So in other words, the effect can become a cause for the arising of another phenomenon. When the mindfulness is not sharp and the concentration is not deep enough, then meditators can't see the arising of awareness or the consciousness clearly. Sometimes meditators are mindful of a clear object, for example, the rising movements. At the same time, the mind also conscious of other phenomena or other objects. But in the ultimate reality, it's not possible for the mind to perceive or to become aware of 3 or 4 phenomena at the same moment. In reality, the mind becomes conscious of 3 or 4 phenomena, one after another, very rapidly. The mind is noting or becoming aware of the phenomenon one after another so rapidly that it gives us an impression that the mind perceiving 3 or 4 phenomena at the same moment. But when meditators are endowed with sharp mindfulness and a deep concentration, in this momentary concentration, they come to realize that the mindfulness or the consciousness is perceiving one phenomenon at each moment. At that moment, meditators could perceive various phenomena arising and passing away instantly, one after another. The mindfulness also noticing this phenomenon arising, passing away instantly, one after another. So when there's deep concentration, meditators will realize that there's a pair of processes. In other words, whenever there's an object, then there's arising of awareness or the consciousness of knowing that object. So that awareness or the consciousness will pass away almost at the same moment with the object. So when meditators could realize the arising of the consciousness, at the time meditators could perceive the true natures of the phenomena clearly. In other words, the consciousness is only perceiving, for example, process of movements. If at that moment the sound appears clearly at the ear door, then meditators will perceive the consciousness of hearing clearly. So meditators could not make a distinction what sound was that, or what noise, or whose voice. But if the mindfulness is not sharp and concentration is not deep enough, meditators may not able to perceive hearing as hearing. Meditators will come to perceive the sound, what sound, whose voice, and so on. So as long as mindfulness is not sharp and concentration is not deep, it's not possible to be mindful of hearing as hearing or seeing as seeing. Even though meditators wanted to be mindful of a consciousness hearing, it's not possible because that mindfulness is not yet strong enough or powerful enough to realize consciousness of hearing as hearing or movements as movements. Even though you have the knowledge about the practice that the mindful meditators must mindful of hearing as hearing, be aware of conscious hearing, but in reality, during the actual practice, if the mindfulness is not sharp and there's no deep concentration, it's not possible to mindful and note hearing as hearing or smelling as smelling. So meditators need to be patient and develop mindfulness based on personal experience. So sometimes meditators do perceive that the abdomen is moving. They mindful and note it as, for example, rising or falling. So they need to direct the mindfulness to perceive or to experience the process movements precisely. So meditators, through the mental noting, direct the mindfulness to perceive the phenomena, for example, movements, or pain, or hot, coolness, and so on. At the beginning of practice, it's not possible to go beyond the concept immediately. Concept, for example, the form of the abdomen, the arm is bending, the foot is moving, and so on. So meditators have to direct the mindfulness to the phenomenon, in other words, the movements, hot, pain, so that the mindfulness will be able to perceive the phenomena clearer and clearer. So when meditators could put forth enough effort in the practice, then they shall be able to perceive the movements getting clearer and clearer day by day. They also could perceive other phenomena clearer and clearer day by day. Sometimes meditators keep on mindful and noting whatever phenomenon that's arising. They could be perceiving or experiencing the true nature of the phenomena clearly. But sometimes the mindfulness could be distracted by thinking or reflecting on the experience. When there's a thinking or realization of the experience of meditation, actually meditators already came out from mindfulness at that moment. If meditators is not mindful of that mental state, thinking about the experience or reflecting on the experience, then that thinking or reflecting could cause more thinking about the meditation or the Dharma to arise. It's because when there's a thinking arising, thinking about the experience or reflecting about the experience, actually the mind has gone to the past. It's not mindful of the present moment at all. So when meditators could mindful of the thinking at that time or thinking about the experience, then meditators gain back the mindfulness, come back to the present moment again. So that's why we can only mindful of the present phenomenon, the current phenomenon. So sometimes meditators could perceive the arising of the awareness or consciousness with the process movements, or the arising of the awareness with the pain, and so on. So meditators begins to realize the cause and effect. So meditators need to sustain the effort so that they could perceive a series of cause and effect. And then, if meditators keep on practicing, sometimes they come to realize a pair of processes disappear very instantly, suddenly. Then meditators might be thinking, oh, there's no object to note or to mindful. In fact, there's an object there. If the mindfulness is very strong and sharp, then when meditators realize a pair of processes pass away instantly, suddenly, then if this mindfulness is very sharp, there will be arising of another process of awareness or consciousness, perceiving the other consciousness that come to realize the passing away of that pair of processes. But if the mindfulness is not as sharp and concentration is not very deep enough, then it's not possible to realize that experience. Even meditators purposely want to note the other process of awareness, it's not possible. So sometimes meditators realize both processes have passed away, then the mind's thinking, no object. Then that thinking should be taken as an object of mindfulness as soon as possible. If the mind is searching for something or searching for an object, then quickly mindful of that mental state of searching. So in that way, it doesn't cause a disruption to that continuity of mindfulness. So that's why meditators should try to mindful and note what's arising at that present moment or what's being perceived by that present moment. Meditators need not have to look for an object. So when meditators have gained some experiences in mindfulness meditation, insight meditation, then they come to realize the teaching of conditionality better and better. So the teaching of Paticca is very profound. That's why there's a saying, if one aspires to realize or to understand the Dharma, to see the Dharma, one must see dependent origination or Paticca. So meditators come to realize the important teachings of Paticca or that say that when this exists or that comes to be, with the arising of this, that arises. So when there's an object arising, for example, a process movements, then that's why the awareness of consciousness will be arising instantly. So sometimes it's the physical phenomenon conditioning the arising of the mentality, or the mind or the consciousness. Sometimes the mind condition the arising or happening of a physical phenomenon. So in this case, is the mind conditioning the arising of various process of movements during walking meditation and doing the routine activities. If the mindfulness is not sharp and there's no deep concentration, then it's difficult to perceive clearly the arising of the intention before a process movements. So meditators need not have to search for that mental state intention. The intention is there, but if the mindfulness is not sharp and there's no deep concentration, that's why meditators can't perceive that mental state of intention. There's another process of intending mind. Usually, we know it as a one thing in English. So sometimes meditators are mindful of the standing postures. Be mindful, not standing more than 5 times. They may realize there's a thought arising, like wanting to walk or to start to walk. Then, because of this mental state wanting, then arising, there's a mental state of intention to lift the foot, then intending, lifting, and so on. Not every intention preceded by wanting. Sometimes there's no wanting before the intention. Then, in the teaching of Pacceccasamuppada, say that when this does not exist or that does not come to be, with the cessation of this, that ceases. So if there's no intention to do something, then there's no action, no movements. If a process of a movements, for the rising movements during sitting meditation, had ceased, then definitely the mindfulness or the noting mind will cease as well at that moment. But if the mindfulness and concentration are not strong enough, then meditators could not perceive the passing away of the mindfulness or the consciousness. Sometimes a process movement has stopped or passed away. Meditators might think that the mindfulness is still staying there, watching there. Sometimes meditators are mindful of the thinking, know it as it is, thinking. When thinking has disappeared, the meditators might think that the mindfulness is still staying there. So some meditators might bring back the mindfulness that noted the thinking, bring back the mindfulness to the abdomen and note rising, falling. Actually, that mindfulness should have passed away. So when meditators are mindful of thinking, when thinking has disappeared, then meditators let go of that mindfulness as well. And then in the next movement, feel the abdomen, the abdomen is clear, then the mindful movements again. I'll give you another examples. Sometimes meditators mindful of the touching and note touching. After noted touching, then he bring the mindfulness, noted the first starting point, he will bring the mindfulness to note the second touching point, note touching. Then he will bring the mindfulness to the sitting postures and note sitting. So in that way, meditators could not see the relationship between the mindfulness or the noting mind and the object, whether the touching or the sitting. So if meditators rightly understood the practice of mindfulness meditation, then when they mindful note touching, then they just like let it go. Then as it bring out another attention to note the second touching point, touching. Then as if everything gone, then just be aware of the sitting and not sitting again. Then in the way, when mindfulness getting sharper and sharper, and concentration is getting deeper and deeper, meditators come to realize the relationship of mindfulness or the consciousness with the phenomenon. So it's important to realize what called the interconditionality of the mental and physical phenomena. So in this sutta, the Buddha was talking about his practice before enlightenment. So at the time, he was still a bodhisattva, not yet fully enlightened. Then this thought arising, this world is full of troubles. There's birth, aging, and death. When it has passed away, then there will be rebirth again. So this is really suffering. But there's no one understand or the escape from this suffering headed by aging and death. So when this realization to discern the escape from this suffering, so Bodhisattva was contemplating what's the cause, what's the condition that causes aging and death. So what's the cause, or what's the condition, or what condition is aging and death? So as you know, it's birth. Birth. So the Buddha say, through this careful attention means yoniso manasikara. Then there's this breakthrough by wisdom in him. So when there's birth, aging and death comes to be. Aging and death has birth as its condition. So similarly, when there's phenomenon, then there's a consciousness or awareness arising. So here, careful attention or wise attention, yoniso manasikara, is giving attention to a right cause. Right cause means right directions. But actually, yoniso manasikara is an insight knowledge. The opposite of yoniso manasikara is ayoniso manasikara, unwise attention. So when there's ayoniso manasikara, then one could not see correctly the true nature of phenomena. One will see permanent, happiness, self, beautiful. So when there's a arising of yoniso manasikara, then one would realize the true nature of phenomena. In other words, impermanence, dukkha, suffering, anatta, no self, and what I call foulness or loathsomeness. So Bodhisattva keep on contemplating further. When what exists, does birth come to be? By what is this birth condition? So you might have the knowledge of this Paticca When there's bhava or becoming, then this birth comes to be. So this birth has a bhava as its condition. So the Bodhisattva keep on paying wise attention, yoniso manasikara, to each link of the dependent origination. Then the Bodhisattva paying careful attention. When what exists, does the name and form or namarupa come to be? So by what is namarupa or name and form condition? So what's the condition of name and form? So when it's consciousness, vijnana, name and form comes to be. So this name and form has consciousness as its condition. Then Bodhisattva pay careful attention. Further, when what exists, does consciousness come to be? By what is consciousness condition? What's the condition for the arising of this vijnana consciousness? But in this sutta, although you may note the link of paticcasamuppada dependent on volition formation, these are sankhara, arising consciousness. But in this sutta, the Bodhisattva did not contemplate further. So when what exists, does consciousness come to be? By what is consciousness condition? Then the Bodhisattva say, through this uniso manasikara, careful attention, there took place in him breakthrough by wisdom. So when there's name and form, consciousness come to be. So consciousness has name and form as its condition. So isn't it in your practice, you only come to realize consciousness is arising depend on nama rupa. Can consciousness arise without nama rupa? So it can't arise. So there's a sutta say that nama rupa, rupa as you know, consists of the four primary material elements, and name nama here refers to vedana, feeling or sensation, perception sanya, and sankhara. So these four aggregates, in accordance to Anasutta, that means rupa, vedana, sanya, sankhara, are the home of consciousness. Isn't it? When the form is standing, the consciousness is standing with the form. So when they're sitting, the consciousness sitting with the form. So in this sutta, the Buddha says, as a bodhisattva at the time, this consciousness turns back, does not go further than name and form. It is to this extent that one may be born, and then because there's birth, then there's aging and death, and then pass away and reborn again. So in other words, there's a mutual condition between consciousness and the name and form, isn't it? There's a mutual condition. So the Buddha merely stopped the contemplation or giving careful attention till that link, because Bodhisattva needs to develop insight based on the present existence. That present existence actually consists merely 5 aggregates. Can Bodhisattva develop insight by paying careful attention to past existence, the 5 aggregates of past existence? Or can Bodhisattva develop insight by giving careful attention, uniso manasikara, to the future existence? It means the 5 aggregates of the future existence. He can't develop any insight in it. So similarly, anyone who aspires to develop insight knowledge of wisdom or jnana or panya, then one must take the 5 aggregates as an object of mindfulness meditation. So that volitional formation and ignorance belong to the past. But by giving careful attention to the link of a craving, tanha, clinging upadana, and bhava, that also included ignorance, avidya, and sankhara, volitional formation. So to this extent that one may be born and then aging, pass away, and then born again. To this extent that one means a being, is merely a conventional expressions. But in ultimate sense, what does take birth is a consciousness, what we call rebirth consciousness. So when there's this consciousness with a name and form as its condition, and name and form with consciousness as its condition, Then there will be this birth, aging, death. After death or pass away, then there will be birth again. When there's a nama rupa as condition, then the salayatana will be arising. So then the Bodhisattva give this wise attention or careful attention to the link in terms of arising with the salayatana as condition, then there's contact. So the Bodhisattva gave this careful attention to the link, one link after another. When there's this birth as a condition, then there's aging and death. So as you know, when there's aging and death, there will be sorrow, lamentation, and so on. Then Bodhisattva realized that this is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. So the Bodhisattva realized this is the origination or the origination. He said, to things unheard before, there arose in him vision, knowledge, wisdom, true knowledge, and light, Cakkhu, Jnana, Panya, Vijaya, and Aloka. Then did the Bodhisattva stop the universal manasikara at that moment? Then did Bodhisattva stop the wise reflection at that moment? The Bodhisattva had realized about the origins or samudaya of the suffering. If the Bodhisattva did not give universal manasikara further, then we will not know about the cessation of suffering. So the Bodhisattva contemplate further or give careful attention. When what does not exist, does aging and death not come to be? With the cessation of what does the cessation of aging and death come about? So through this universal manasikara, there's wisdom arising. When there's no birth, aging and death does not come to be. With the cessation of birth comes cessation of aging and death. So if there's no birth, there's no more aging, death, there's no sorrow, lamentation, and so on. Then Bodhisattva give the wise attention or universal manasikara further to the link of Paticcasamuppada. For example, when one does not exist, does birth not come to be? With the cessation of what does the cessation of birth come about? So in that way, the Buddha gives wise attention to each link after link. Then he contemplates with the cessation of what, or does the cessation of name and form come about? So when there's no consciousness, name and form does not come to be. With the cessation of consciousness comes cessation of name and form. So when what does not exist, or does consciousness not come to be, or with the cessation of what does a cessation of consciousness come about? So when there's no name and form or namarupa, consciousness does not come to be. With the cessation of name and form comes cessation of consciousness. So their arising was due to mutual condition. Similarly, their cessation is also due to mutual condition. So what did Bodhisattva discover at that moment? Actually, the Buddha at the time discovered the path to enlightenment. Isn't it? Do you understand this path of enlightenment? So, in other words, with the cessation of name and form comes cessation of consciousness. With the cessation of consciousness comes cessation of name and form. If there's no, for example, no movements arising during meditation, can the consciousness arising? So it can't arise. When the form, for example, the movements has ceased, then your consciousness staying on, the consciousness will also pass away. So In that way, Bodhisattva contemplate further. In other words, give this careful attention to other link. With the cessation of name and form, then there's a cessation of salayatana. So the Bodhisattva give careful attention to the cessation of each link. So when there's a cessation of what called bhava, then there's a cessation of birth. When there's a cessation of birth, then there's a cessation of aging and death. So in the way, Bodhisattva realize this cessation of the whole mass of suffering. So the Buddha said cessation in regard to things unheard before, there arose in him Cakkhu, Jnana, Panya, Vijaya, and Aloko. Then the Buddha explains with a simile. Suppose a man wandering through a forest who see an ancient path, an ancient route traveled upon by people in the past. So this man would follow it and would see an ancient city, an ancient capital, or that had been inhabited by people in the past. So what he saw is a delightful place with parks, groves, ponds, and so on. So this man informed the king or the royal minister. So the king or the royal minister would renovate that city, and that city become successful, prosperous again. Then the Buddha said, so too I saw the ancient path, the ancient route traveled by the perfectly enlightened ones of the past. So what is that ancient path? The Noble Eightfold Path. So through this Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddha realized the Four Noble Truths. So here, the Buddha explains each link in terms of the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha said, I follow that path, and by doing so, I have directly known aging and death, its origin, its cessation, and the way leading to its cessations. So the Buddha explained each link in terms of the Four Noble Truths. Then finally, the Buddha also said, I have directly known Sankhara, original formation, its origin, its cessation, and the way leading to its cessations. So here, the Buddha bringing the second link, original formations. When Buddha thought, I have directly known original formation, its origin. When he say its origin, actually ignorance, avidya, is included. In that way, the Buddha has explained the 12 links of dependent origination eventually. But in order to develop direct knowledge or insight knowledge, we only merely take nama rupa as the object. We can't contemplate about the volition formation, ignorance of the past. So if you do practice the right way of mindfulness, you come to realize the arising of consciousness is dependent on namarupa, or the namarupa is arising dependent on consciousness. So if there's a cessation of namarupa, then consciousness will also come to cessation. So with the cessation of consciousness, then there's a cessation of namarupa, name and form. So in the practice of mindfulness meditation, meditators shall make more and more progress if they could realize conditionality clearly during the practice. There's no self or yogi exercising any form of control over the process mindfulness or the arising of the object. It is also not possible to exercise any form of control over the passing away of the object and the passing away of the consciousness or the awareness. So if you wish to realize the Dharma, you have to realize dependent origination through your direct experience or direct knowledge. and you have to make sure that your practice mindfulness will lead you to develop the Noble Eightfold Path fully. So I wish all meditators be heedful to the teachings of the Buddha, treading on this ancient path so that you can realize this profound teaching of conditionality and the noble truth and attaining your spiritual goal soon.
สาธุ สาธุ สาธุ